Welcome to Mr. Marr's Modern Studies Help Guide. In today's episode, we are discussing the National 5 Modern Studies exam, specifically how you answer questions which are sometimes called selective or support and oppose. There are two types of questions in a National 5 Modern Studies exam. There's knowledge and understanding questions, which are based on your knowledge of the topics you've been studying and how best you understand this. And there is also inquiry skills, which is when you are given sources of information in the exam and you have to answer questions based on this. The selective or support and oppose questions that we will discuss today are drawn from the inquiry skills section. Let's discuss some background information about these questions. Selective or support and oppose questions are worth 10 marks. The purpose of these questions is to ask you to identify evidence which supports, and therefore is for, and opposes or against a particular statement. You will get 3 sources of information and you must use all 3 at least once in your answer or you will lose marks. As has been noted, these questions are worth 10 marks. Let's talk about what you get these marks for. You will quite simply get 1 mark for each piece of relevant information or evidence from the sources that you give, which either supports a point of view or opposes it. You can gain extra marks for synthesis, and that means if you make a point support with one piece of evidence, you should try and support this with facts from a different source. This is one way you might want to answer the question. You should start off by writing there is evidence to support and name the person when he or she says, and you should discuss the issue that they are discussing. Once you've done this, you should then aim to give up to 5 pieces of evidence that prove that this is the case. And as has been noted, one way to try and speed this up is to include synthesis. You should support evidence from one source with a fact from another source. Once you've done this, you should, if you've done it properly, have gained 5 marks. To get the other 5 marks, you should then write, however, there is evidence to oppose, name the person when he or she says, and then you should name their statement. From there, you do the point as above. You try and give 5 pieces of evidence that proves that the person in this case is wrong. And as has again been noted, try and include synthesis when you do this. It's important that you don't reuse evidence. Once you've used a piece of information, don't keep going back to it as part of your answer. Let's look at an example question which is drawn from the crime in Scotland topic. In this case, we are discussing whether or not victims of crime received satisfactory support. And as the question itself tells you, you should try and give evidence from the source to support Oliver Thompson or to oppose him. In this case, you'll be given 3 sources of evidence. One of them is a text information, one of them is graphs, and our third source is more text. We should discuss, as has been mentioned, the issues that support the issue in the first place. Start with a sentence that proves this. In this case, there's evidence to support Oliver Thompson when he says that victims in Scotland receive satisfactory support. Now we have to give up to 5 pieces of evidence that supports him in this. We'll look at our different sources to find this. In this case, source 1 has a piece of information, and so we can write this down, gaining our first mark. We then look at other sources and try and identify relevant pieces of information, and we would write this down to gain our second mark. We continue this process, going to a different source, finding more information, and adding it to get our third mark. We look at another source, we find a relevant piece of information, we add it as a 4th point, and then finally we aim to give our 5th supporting point. So far we have given 5 pieces of evidence that supports the view Oliver Thompson said, and so we've got our 5 marks. Now we want to try and get the other 5 marks, and this time we have to show ways that Oliver Thompson might be seen to be wrong. We start off with our statement that clearly shows we are now providing evidence to oppose him. Again, we look at our sources, and we provide our 6th piece of evidence, but our first one that opposes him. We look at other sources, again we find relevant evidence, and we go up to our 7th mark. We check another source, we find information, and add this for our 8th point, Another source gives us our 9th piece of information. And finally, we look at another source, we get our 10th piece of information. Overall, you can see that we have given 10 pieces of information, and we used all of the sources at least once. We start off, as has been said, by supporting him. We make it clear to the examiner that what we're about to do is show the evidence that suggests he's right. Having done this, we then give up to 5 pieces of evidence that supports the statement. We then move over to discuss the evidence that opposes him, but starting off by giving the marker a heads up that this is what we're going to do. And again, we give up to 5 pieces of evidence which oppose the statement. This gives us our 10 marks overall. National 5 Modern Studies exam, how to answer selective or support and oppose questions. It's really that simple.